Tonight, we're going to speak about the universal significance of the holiday of Passover. Passover is one of three Chagim in the yearly cycle of the Jewish festivals. Chagim are holidays. They are called Chagim because at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, when the temple stood, there was a specific sacrifice that was brought called the Korban Chagiga, which is brought only on these days, and so therefore they're called Chagim specifically. That's distinct from holidays like the ones like Rosh Hashanah, like Yom Kippur, like Purim or Hanukkah, which are not technically Chagim. Okay, those are other types of festivals. And the other two include Shavuot and Sukkot, which we're going to see later this year. And each of these festivals emphasize a historical event in the history of the Jewish people. Shavuot, for example, commemorates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and Sukkot, the fact that the Israelites dwelled in tents from the time of God's delivering them from Egypt until they reached the promised land. The word Passover is a translation of the Hebrew word Pesach, which means to pass over. Right? So it's a good direct translation of that. We have a verse in Exodus chapter 12, verses 12 through 13, which says, "The blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you." Right? The B'nei Yisrael were commanded to slaughter a lamb and take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorposts. And that would be a sign that when I, God, see the blood, I will pass over you so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Here we're talking about the plague of the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians. Now, Rashi asks an interesting question. It says, V'ra'iti et hadam, I will see the blood. Why does God have to say, I will see the blood? Since everything is revealed before him. He sees everything, he knows everything. So rather, what the Holy One, blessed be he, is saying is that because you will have heeded my command and placed the blood of the lamb on the doorpost as I have asked you to do, I will see that you're occupied with my commandments and I will pass over you. So now we see that the word Pesach, Passover, has more than one connotation. And Rashi goes further. He says, Ufasachti, I will pass over, v'chomalti, which means that I will have compassion. It doesn't only mean to skip over. It also means to have specific compassion on the recipient. And then he brings a verse from Isaiah in chapter 31, which says, Fasoach v'himlit, which also indicates compassion, mercy. And I say, says Rashi, that kol psicha lashon dilug ukfitza, that all psicha, all times, anytime that the word Pesach is mentioned, it refers to dilug, skipping over, ukfitza, and jumping over. And then Rashi says again on the word pasachti, I will skip over, midaleg haya mibate Yisrael. God skipped over the homes of the Israelites to the homes of the Egyptians. What was the necessity of this? Didn't you have, let's say, an Egyptian neighborhood and a Jewish neighborhood? Says Rashi, no. Shahayu shruim zeh b'toch zeh, one population dwelled amongst the other. So you have here a situation where the Jewish people are a nation that is contained within the Egyptian nation. Now, Jews are commanded to remember the Exodus from Egypt on a daily basis. That is a commandment. And also to teach about the Exodus to their children. We have in Exodus chapter 13, verses 16 through 10, Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the word for Egypt. Out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. That's to commemorate the fact that they had to leave Egypt quickly, in haste, and did not have time for their dough to rise. This day you shall come out in the month of Aviv. The month of Aviv is the Hebrew word for the month of Nisan. The Hebrew months, or the Jewish months of the year, are actually called after their Babylonian names, but the Torah does have Hebrew names for specific months, one of which is the month of Aviv. Okay. Usually it simply mentions the month by the number or the order in which it falls in the year, but the month of Aviv is a specific one. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring you into the land of the Canaani and the Chiti and the Amori and the Chivi and the Yevusi. These are the Canaanite nations that dwelled in the land of Israel before the Bnei Israel got there, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, and you shall keep the service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. So you have a 7-day celebration, which has a day of rest at the beginning and at the end, and you have to eat unleavened bread throughout. And there shall be no leavened bread seen with you, meaning to say we can't have it in our houses, and neither shall it be seen in any of our borders. Therefore, meaning to say you're not going to find, except for the places where they actually burned the chametz, burned the leavened bread, leavened products, you're not going to see any bread anywhere. Telling a story about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, one of the famous Hasidic personalities. He was, I would say, the foremost rabbinic authority in the Hasidic part of Ukraine during his time. I've been to Berditchev. It's a very beautiful shul there, a place that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak himself used to pray. Anyway, he asked his Hasidim on Pesach, on Passover, to bring him Turkish wool, which was contraband in the Russian Empire. And they searched around for several hours and they found some Turkish wool, which, it's like, having illicit drugs or something, because the Turks and the Russians were at war with each other at the time. And then he asked them to try to find in the Jewish neighborhood any chametz whatsoever. Chametz is leavened bread, leavened products. And they searched around, they couldn't find anything. And he turned to heaven, he said, Rabbi Shalom, Master of the universe, look how your children hold your mitzvot so precious. You can find Turkish wool, which should get you thrown in jail, but you can't find any chametz. Okay, in any case, the celebration of Passover has begun on the first night with the Passover Seder. And during the time of the Geonim, which brings us back all the way to the 9th century, a teaching tool was created to help with the fulfillment of these mitzvot. It's a compendium known as the Haggadah, or the telling, right? Because we have this verse, as we were saying, from chapter 13 of Exodus, verses 6 through 10, it says that unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days, there shall be no leavened bread, etc. And you shall relate to your child on that day, saying, this is done because of that which the Lord did to me or for me when I came out of Egypt. And the Hebrew, it says, V'higadata levincha, which means you shall tell your children. You shall tell your child. Higadata is similar to the word Haggadah, and it's exactly the same root of Hey Gimel Daled, which is the 3-letter root in the Hebrew word to tell or to give over, to relate. And the Haggadah is this teaching tool which contains the order of events, rituals, and readings for that night. Right? The order is the English word for the word Seder. Because the mitzvah is to teach the children, we try to make it fun. We keep plenty of candy and marshmallows around for treats when they ask good questions or have interesting divrei Torah about the story of Israel and Egypt, slavery, the 10 plagues, etc. Most commemorative mitzvot contain the phrase, as a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt, Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, which ties it into this seminal event. Whenever we make Kiddush, whenever we sanctify a holiday or a Shabbat using a cup of wine, we also include the phrase Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim. The reason for this is very simple. Although the Israelites were distinct from the Egyptians, they were at that point part of the general fabric of humanity. We can say that the Israelites were B'nai Noach at this time. But God's freeing of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt was analogous to the delivery of a child from its mother's womb. When a child is in its mother's womb, it is considered ubar yerech imo. The fetus is essentially just a part of an appendage of the mother. But once it emerges into the air of the world, it is a completely distinct and separate entity. And therefore, the exodus from Egypt was the birth of a new nation. The people of Israel left the general category of B'nai Noach and became a nation that dwells apart. Now, with all this in mind, Passover at first glance looks like a holiday that is exclusively Jewish, and our Noahide brothers and sisters might be wondering if there are any ramifications for humanity in general. Is there something that they can hook into about this holiday? It is exclusively Jewish in the sense that these are events where we are the main characters, we're the protagonists of the story, and it represents the formation of the Jewish people as a distinct nation. This is all true. But something funny has happened throughout history, right? At the same time, God made it so that the Torah was first translated into Greek and subsequently into every other language, and the combination of the Jewish diaspora and the spread of religions like Christianity brought the Torah to the four corners of the world. So there is a general knowledge and familiarity with its contents with most people. Now, we do regard there as being something tragic about the Torah becoming one of the great books of world literature, as if it should be considered alongside the Iliad and the Odyssey and Beowulf. There is something tragic also about the appropriation of the identity of Israel through the replacement theologies of Christianity and other religions that have followed. And yet it allows people to put themselves in the shoes of the Israelites, to see their experiences of bondage, of freedom, God's miracles through the eyes of the Israelites, and to identify with that. Oppressed people everywhere can find themselves in the story of the Exodus. And the fact that there are people to this day who suffer slavery means that the idea of liberation is just as relevant as it was the first time around. But just as the Jewish people is a unique nation with its unique history, Passover isn't simply a generic story of slavery and freedom, or oppression and justice. It might seem controversial to say this, but the Torah does not forbid slavery. And in fact, there are whole sections of both the written and the oral law regarding slavery, as well as rabbinic responsa. This is an institution that went on until, at least in the Western world, until about 150 years ago. Now, of course, we do not and would not practice slavery today because the whole nature of society has changed, at least Western or Western style and democratic societies. And it's given the individual human being rights and protections, which they did not have, where servitude actually provided those things for them. So if Passover was just a sort of a universal story about the ills and the evils of slavery, that would be something else. But that's not what this is about. We have to understand what the Torah's definition of freedom is. We have a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Chapters of the Fathers. This is chapter 6, Mishnah 2. And chapter 6 is kind of an auxiliary chapter of Pirkei Avot. It's written in the style of the Mishnah, and it also contains wisdom from our sages. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, quoting the verse, "V'haluchot maaseh Elokim hema," the tablets were the work of God. "V'hamichtav michtav Elokim hu," and the writing on the tablets was the writing of God. "Charut ala luchot," engraved upon the tablets. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi then comments and says, "Al tikre charut," don't read it as charut, which means engraved, ela cherut, which means freedom. For no one is called free except he who occupies himself with Torah. It's a fascinating concept. That freedom is not about, as Janis Joplin described it, just another word for nothing left to lose. It's not a values-free, morally relative expression of having no limits. It is the acceptance of the yoke of heaven, of God's commandments. It's the Torah that frees a person from being a slave to their own physical existence and enables them to be master of their own self, to be a spiritual being. Pharaoh might have been the ruler of Egypt, but by this definition that we have from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he was not a free man. And the society of ancient Egypt, which was an amazing society, incredible, advanced society. There are unbelievable things that we find amongst the ruins of ancient Egypt that indicate that they had technology that we may not even possess at the present moment. Unbelievable strides made in medicine, and engineers to this day marvel at their ability to create unbelievable symmetry in the carving of stone. The fact that the pyramids were built in the short period that they were built is unbelievable. And no one to this day can really explain how they managed to get those stones across a sandy desert. These are things that are mysteries. The Egyptians might have discovered electricity, not necessarily how to harness it, but had come into contact with it. They were a very, very sophisticated society, and I think almost completely egalitarian. One of the pharaohs was a woman. She wore the pharaoh's beard, and it was not an issue. She was a she-king as opposed to a queen. And such was Egypt. But for all of that, it was still just a society of slaves because it was entirely ruled by the pursuit of the physical, by the desire and the passion for the physical life. For a Jew, freedom means the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. For a ben or a bat Noach, freedom means the 7 Noahide laws, which were restated at the time of the giving of the Torah. Now, we see elsewhere that God says about the Jewish people, they are my servants and not servants of servants. Who are we talking about here? What this means is that the rest of humanity was already acquired by God as his servants. How did God acquire the rest of humanity as his servants? Through the 7 Noahide laws, which had been revealed earlier. When God says they are my servants and not servants of servants, it means that the Jewish people became the servants of God directly through a new relationship of Torah. This is the essential meaning of being a nation that dwells apart. This concept of a nation that dwells apart is a praise that was uttered by Bilam when he tried to curse the Jewish people, and God did not allow him to do that. He says, and this is in Numbers chapter 23, verse 9, Ki mirosh tzurim er'enu, from the top of the rocks I see him, umi gvaot ashurenu, and from the hills I behold him, hein am levadad yishkon, truly it's a people that shall dwell alone, uvagoyim lo yitchashav, and shall not be reckoned among the nations. This is praise given by Bilam to the Jewish people, that we dwell alone, that we are not reckoned amongst the nations. The Maharal of Prague has an explanation. It said in the verse, hen am levadad yishkon, and it seems to be an additional sort of an extraneous expression. What is hein? The expression of the word hein truly is as follows. From the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. Truly, this is what their forefathers caused them to merit. What is what their forefathers caused them to merit? The forefathers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What is it about our connection to those people that caused us to merit to dwell alone, right? Because according to the Maharal of Prague, in the verse where we say from the top of the rocks, we mention rocks and we mention hills. Both are items that are strong and everlasting. According to the Maharal of Prague, the rocks and the hills refer to the forefathers of the Jewish people. They caused them the merit to dwell alone. This is a matter of distinction. It's very important, though, to understand what it means to be a nation that dwells apart. It's not a xenophobic statement. It doesn't mean that there is some sort of hatred or distrust of people who are not Jewish. We understand when we look deeply into the Torah that humanity is one, and it has subsections, different tasks, different missions for different types of people. The point of being a nation that dwells apart is that only from this position of absolute freedom and independence can Israel be the light unto the nations, the teachers of Torah, which contains really the redemption of all humanity. But they could not do that in their position as a nation within another nation, as the slave nation of another nation. Now, let's consider a section of the Haggadah, which we are going to read, hopefully within a week's time. It says the following thing: how much more so is the good that is doubled and quadrupled that the omnipresent one of all bestowed upon us. There's a famous song that we sing on Seder night, Dayenu, which you can look up if you haven't heard it before, that we say that if he hadn't taken us out of Egypt, if he had only taken us out of Egypt, that would have been enough for us to sit here and praise God. But and if he'd done that and not judged Egypt, or acted against their gods, or killed their firstborn, or gave them their wealth, etc., it would have been enough. And any element of God's salvation is something that needs to be celebrated, and it would have been enough. But then we mention all those things, and we see how much more so is the good that is doubled and quadrupled that the omnipresent one of all bestowed upon us, since he took us out of Egypt and made judgments with them. He judged them and acted against their gods and killed their firstborn and gave us their wealth and split the sea for us and brought us through it on dry land and drowned our enemies in the sea and supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years, fed us the manna, gave us the Shabbat, brought us close to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah, and brought us into the land of Israel, and built us the chosen house to atone upon all of our sins. That's a lot of good that God has done for us. Now, what's interesting is, let's take the opportunity, right? We take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank God for all the good that he's bestowed upon us. But if you notice, the first half of this list is about God's rescuing us and supporting us. Whereas the second half of the list is about all the ways that God obligates us. Shabbat, Torah, the land of Israel, and the Beit HaMikdash, which is there to enable us to atone for our sins, which implies, obviously, that there are all sorts of ways that we can get tripped up. In other words, the burden has been made heavier upon us. And yet, we know from what we saw before from Pirkei Avot that freedom is about the acceptance of Torah. Freedom is about the acceptance of this yoke. Leaving Egypt is not an end in and of itself. That's why Passover isn't just about being freed from bondage. It's a preparation for the acceptance of Torah, for a life devoted to God and to the plan that he has for the world. Now, notice that the last item is the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, which stood in Jerusalem. We've had two so far. We're waiting for the third one to be built. That is the meeting point between heaven and earth, where we can commune with him. And it is called by Isaiah a house of prayer for all peoples, because it is a place that everybody can come to, that all of humanity can come and offer there. So if we're still left with the question is, what can B'nai Noach, what can Noahides grab onto about Pesach, about Passover that is relevant to them? The whole second part of this is relevant. In fact, the whole list is relevant to them because we don't have two separate nations that have nothing to do with each other. We have B'nai Noach and B'nai Israel that are intricately intertwined in order to bring the world to its perfection, to its completion, to a place of peace and a place of the absolute acknowledgement and recognition of God, which is something that we are all waiting for. But things such as Torah and the land of Israel, where there is a Beit HaMikdash, are things that are absolutely relevant because the Torah contains the 7 Noahide laws. It's clear if you look at the actions of the B'nai Noach at the time of the story of the Exodus that the 7 Noahide laws were not being followed. And the beauty of the Torah being given again is that there is a restatement of the 7 Noahide laws. In other words, the world is given the 7 Noahide laws again, given a path to come close to God again. Rabbi Gamliel states, this is in a Mishnah in Tractate Psachim, it says, B'chol dor v'ador, in each and every generation, Adam, chayav Adam lirot et atzmo, a person is obligated to view himself, Ki'ilu hu yatsa min Mitzrayim, as if he went out of Egypt. Each one of us has to look at ourselves as if we went out of Egypt. What does that mean? It's the year 2024. We're talking about something that happened more than 3,000 years ago. Did I go out of Egypt? The answer is yes. The Torah obligates us in doing this. Shene'amar, as the verse states, V'higad to Levincha, we saw this before, V'higad to Levincha, you shall teach your child, Ba'yomahu, on that day, saying, Ba'avor zeh asa Hashem li, for this reason, this is done, what we're doing here, having this Seder and talking about all these things and this tremendous salvation, is done because of that which the Lord did for me when I came out of Mitzrayim, when I came out of Egypt, when I came out of Egypt. The verse itself indicates that we're not talking about something that happened once and we're just telling the story of it. We're talking about something that has relevance in every moment of a person's life. Okay, so in other words, you'll notice that the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. And that word is related to another Hebrew word, which is Meitzarim, which means straits, like a narrow, confining place. There's something about the name of the place itself that indicates that it's a place that limits your growth. There's a teaching in Chabad circles that the Tani looked at this statement of Rabbi Gamliel and sort of edited it, right? Rabbi Gamliel said, "B'chol dor v'ador," in each and every generation, a person has to view himself as if he came out of Egypt. And the Tani said, every hour a person has to look at himself as if he came out of Egypt. And that his grandson, the Rabbi the Tzemach Tzedek, added further that a person has to have this consciousness every second. Each and every second, we should be leaving Mitzrayim. We should be leaving Egypt. What these two Hasidic rabbis were describing is a continuum of spiritual maturity, meaning that when it comes to spiritual growth, a person has to continually strive to go further and further to serve God better and better and to know him on deeper and deeper levels. What this does is it makes the previous moment into a place of confinement relative to where you are now. Each individual, each person has their own Egypt, has their own Mitzrayim, as well as their own experience of Exodus as it pertains to their individual spiritual growth. May we all be blessed to come out of our own Mitzrayims personally, as well as a unified humanity to experience the redemption in our time. Amen.